When I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Belfast, Ireland for 3 years. I picked up on my playmates' Irish accent, and when I returned to third grade, I had a strong Irish brogue. Because I had lived in Ireland, I hadn't learned to play American games such as kick the can, baseball, capture the flag, or jump rope rhymes, and I felt very out of it. I could sense the kids in my class thought I was different because they couldn't understand me, and I didn't know how to play any of the games they had been playing for years. My teacher stuck me in speech therapy to get rid of my accent and tried to help me catch up academically because I lagged far behind. I was having trouble, especially in math, but was afraid to admit that I didn't know some of the basics. I didn't want to stand out anymore, and I longed to be accepted and have friends. Instead of asking for help in math, I discovered that all the answers to our worksheets were on cards in the back of the room. I began sneaking those cards out and then copying the answers without being caught. It seemed for a time all my problems were solved. In my heart, I knew it was wrong, but it seemed to me the end justified the means. I began getting attention from the teacher and other students for doing so well. In fact, I was presented as the model student who worked hard, finished my work quickly, and consistently scored the highest in the class. It was wonderful for a while because I was popular and a lot of kids liked me. But my conscience kept after me because I knew I had betrayed myself and what my parents had always taught me about honesty. I wanted to stop. I was so ashamed of cheating. But now I was in a trap and didn't know how to get out of it without totally humiliating myself. I had to keep cheating because the teacher expected me to do well every time now. I was miserable, and the problem seemed insurmountable to an 8-year-old with no way out. I knew I should tell my parents what was happening, but I was too embarrassed because I was the oldest. I began acting out at home, losing my temper easily because of the pressure of dealing with this problem alone. My parents told me later that they could sense something was very wrong in my life, but they didn't know what it was. In Ireland, we had started the practice of having private interviews with a parent once a month. This was a time when we could talk about anything we wanted, complain about home duties or unfairness shown, talk about our friends or anything that interested us, give ideas for activities, share problems, or whatever. The rule was that mom or dad could only listen, not talk or criticize or give advice or suggestions without being invited to. We all looked forward to our private interviews. During one of these interviews, my dad let me go off about some injustice I felt my parents dealt me without defending himself or getting angry. He could sense that wasn't the real problem, and he just let me talk. Finally, when I felt accepted and not condemned, I cautiously started to open up a little to sense his reaction. He asked if things were going well in school and if I was happy there. Defensively, I blurted out, "If you only knew, you'd think I was terrible. I can't tell you about it." For a few minutes, he affirmed his unconditional love and acceptance of me, and I felt his sincerity. I had opened up on other occasions about things without rebuke, and so I felt I could trust him with the awful truth. Suddenly, it just blurted from me, and I found myself crying and yelling, "I'm cheating in math!" Then I fell into his arms. It was such a relief to get it out. Even though I couldn't see a solution and feared the consequences, I had shared my terrible secret with my father, and I still felt his love and support of me in spite of it. I remember him saying, "Oh, how awful for you to have had this inside you for so long. I wish you had told me so I could have helped you." He asked if he could call my mother into the room, and then I told them the whole story. I saw no way out, but amazingly enough, they helped me work out a solution that would not totally humiliate me. We would go together to the teacher. I would get a 6th grader to help me with my math. They affirmed me and understood what happened, and to this day I can still feel the relief of that moment. Who knows what pattern I would have established in my life and what road I would have taken if I had continued in my dishonesty? But I was able to share my problem with parents who had already established a relationship of trust and a track record of consistent love and encouragement. They had made such huge deposits over the years that my large withdrawal did not leave me totally bankrupt. Instead, that day I collected interest. I often think back to that experience, and I wonder what would have happened if I had been so busy, so rushed, so anxious to get to an appointment or to get onto something more important that I didn't take the time to really listen. What more would that daughter have gone through? What different choices might she have made? I'm so grateful, at least in that circumstance, that we had set aside the time to be together, to focus on the relationship. That 1 hour together made a profound difference in both our lives. One of the greatest opportunities of being a parent is to teach children the principles that will ultimately bring them the greatest happiness and success in life. But you can't do that without the relationship. I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. One of my favorite memories of one-on-one time with my dad was during the summer of 1996. Every morning, Dad would wake me up at 6, and we would go biking on an upper mountain road together. We would spend a full hour riding alongside each other, talking things over and telling stories. He would teach me so many things, and I could tell him anything. We would end the morning by watching the sunrise and drinking water from a fresh spring. I often reflect on those rides and remember how wonderful it was. One-on-one bonding times give you the opportunity to build that relationship, that emotional bank account, so that you can teach. Sandra and I have found that when we take one child aside from the others, go where there is some privacy, and give full attention, when we are completely present, we are amazed how effective our teaching, discipline, or communication can be. But when out of a sense of time pressure and practical necessity, we attempt to teach, discipline, or correct when others are present, we are amazed at how ineffective we usually are. I am convinced that many children know what they should do, but their minds are not made up to do it. People don't act on what they know, they act on how they feel about what they know and about themselves. If they can come to feel good about themselves and about the relationship, they are encouraged to act on what they know. These weekly family times and one-on-ones are vital, even foundational in dealing with fundamental family needs, in building emotional bank accounts, and in creating the entire culture in the family. So, how do you do it? How do you manage your time to have a weekly family time and regular, meaningful one-on-one bonding times with the members of your family? I'd like to ask you to use your imagination for a moment. Imagine that you're standing behind a table, and on this table is a large open-mouthed jar that is almost completely filled with small pebbles. On the table beside the jar are several large fist-sized rocks. Now suppose that this jar represents the next week of your life. Let the pebbles in the jar represent all the things you'd normally do. Let the big rocks represent family time and one-on-ones and other things that are really important to you, maybe things such as exercising or working on a family mission statement or just having fun together. Make the rocks represent things that, in your heart of hearts, you know you really should do, but at this point haven't been able to fit into your schedule. As you stand behind this table, imagine that your task is to fit in as many of the big rocks as you possibly can. You begin to work at it. You try to force the big rocks into the jar, but you're able to get only 1 or 2 in, so you take them out again. You look at all the big rocks. You study their size. You look at their shape. You realize that maybe if you choose different rocks, you could get more of them in, so you try again. You work at it and rearrange things until you're finally able to fit 3 big rocks into the jar. But that's it. As hard as you try, that's all you can fit in. How do you feel? You look at the jar, it's full to the brim, and you have all these really important things, including these family things that aren't getting done. And it's the same thing every week. Maybe it's time to consider a different approach. Suppose you take out those 3 big rocks. Suppose you get another container and you pour all the pebbles into it, and then you put the big rocks in first. Now how many of those rocks are you going to fit in? a lot more for sure. And when you have the jar full of big rocks, then you can pour the pebbles in over them, and look how many of them will still fit in. The point is this: if you don't put the big rocks in first, they hardly ever get in at all. The key is to put the big rocks in first. Cynthia said, "Dad was out of town quite a bit while I was growing up, but we did more together as a family than most. I had more one-on-one time with him than any of my friends whose fathers had 9-to-5 jobs." I think there were two reasons. One was that he always planned ahead. He really believed in being proactive, in making it happen, in beginning with the end in mind. At the first of every school year, he always wanted to know, when are the boys' football games? When are the girls' scheduled activities? And he hardly ever missed anything important. He was rarely out of town on family night. He was always home on the weekends so that we could do activities and go to church together. There were times when people would say, "Oh, your dad's out of town again." But a lot of my friends whose parents worked 9 to 5 would sit in front of the TV at night and not even communicate. I realize now the work it took for us to have family time together, to have family devotionals, family prayers, family activities. With a hectic job and 9 kids in 5 different schools, my parents really had to fight for it. But they did. The bottom line is that it was important to them, and so they wrestled with it and figured out how to do it. I think the second reason for our time together was the rules. You don't go anywhere on Sunday, that's a family day and a church day. You never miss Monday night, that's family night. We'd usually do something as a family on one weekend night. It was just kind of required, and sometimes as teenagers we'd resent it a little bit. But it was kind of accepted as part of the culture, and after a while we didn't fight it. My early experiences of feeling the pain and frustration of not prioritizing some of our children's plays and ball games and other important activities led me to, of each school year, Sandra and I have pressed the schools for calendars of events that may involve our children. We've placed high priority on scheduling and being at our children's events. We've also encouraged our children to attend each other's events. With almost 50 people, children, spouses, and grandchildren now in the family, we can't go to every activity, but we do what we can and always try to communicate to all family members how important they are and their activities are to us. We also plan major family vacations 2, 3, or even 4 years in advance, and family nights and one-on-one times continue to be held sacred in our home. We have found that there is nothing to compare with the happiness that has come from making family a priority. With many pressures in our lives to do otherwise, it's not always easy to do these things, but it is much, much harder not to. When you don't put the advanced prevention time in building relationships and investing in unifying and organizing the family, you spend much more time later trying to repair broken relationships, save marriages, or influence children who are being powerfully pulled by social forces outside the family. To those who would say, "We don't have time to do these kinds of things," I would say, "You don't have time not to." The key is to plan ahead and be strong. Where there's a will, there's a way. And when you really do put those big family rocks in first, you begin to feel this deep sense of inner peace. You're not constantly feeling torn between family and work. In fact, you will find there's actually more of you to contribute in other places because of it. Commitment to these family structures brings life to the principles of effective family living. It creates a beautiful family culture that enables you not to be seduced by the popular culture's system of extrinsic rewards. When you're on the periphery and don't actually experience this beautiful family culture, it's easy to become distracted, to be pulled in other directions. But when you're in the middle of it, your only question is, how could there possibly be anything better? Instead of just selecting activities, Sandra and I have found that one of the best ways to put the big rocks in first in our lives is to organize around our most important roles, including our family roles, and to set goals in each of these roles each week. Some weeks 1 or 2 goals will be so consuming that we make the decision not to set goals in other roles. For example, when Sandra spends a week helping one of our daughters with a new baby, that means she chooses not to do any public speaking, community service, or extra projects around the home that week. But it's a consciously made decision, and she feels peaceful knowing that the following week she will look at each of her roles and set goals again. We found that by using roles and goals, our lives are much more balanced. Each role is attended to, and we're less likely to get overwhelmed by the urgency of all the day-to-day pressures. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment to look back and think in a larger sense about habits 1, 2, and 3. Habit 1, be proactive, is the most fundamental decision of all. It determines whether you're going to be responsible or a victim. If you make the decision to be responsible, to take initiative, to be the creative force of your life, then the most primary decision facing you is what is your life about? This is habit 2, begin with the end in mind, which is creating your family mission statement. This is what is called a strategic decision because every other decision will be governed by it. Habit 3 then, put first things first, becomes secondary or tactical. It deals with how to make those first things happen. We have primarily focused on two main structural interventions in a world where outside in fails: the weekly family time and one-on-one bonding experiences between members of the family. When outside in worked, such structures weren't as necessary because they were happening naturally all the time. But the more society is extracted from nature, the more we see the globalization of technology and markets that change the whole economic picture, the more we see the secularization of the culture away from principles, the more we see the erosion of laws and the social will driving the political will to where elections become more and more popularity contests based on sound bites and camera opportunities, the more we must be strong and decisive in creating and using new structures to keep us on track. As you think about implementing these habits in your family, I want to remind you again that you are the expert on your family, and you alone know your situation. During a recent visit to Argentina, I talked with parents who had gathered from all over Latin America to attend a conference. I asked them for feedback on the ideas in this book. The feedback was very positive and supportive, but these parents didn't relate to the formalizing of a weekly family time and one-on-ones. They live in a very family-oriented culture, and for them, almost every night is family time, and one-on-ones are a natural part of daily life. But with other families, the idea of developing a family mission statement and creating new structures of a weekly family time and planned one-on-one bonding experiences is totally off their screen. They don't want any form or structure in their lives. Perhaps they are angry and rebelling against the structures they already have in their lives, structures that they feel have suppressed the full sense of freedom and individuality they value. Those structures may be so filled with negative energy and judgments that any other structure is guilty by association. There's just too much social and psychic baggage. If this is your situation, you may still want to prioritize your family. You may recognize some value in a family mission statement and some of these structures, but feel that doing some of these things is just going too far for now. That's okay. Start where you are. Don't lay a big guilt trip on yourself about the necessity of all this interdependence if you're not ready to move in this direction. You may want to start by simply applying some of these ideas in your own life. Perhaps all you feel you can do is make some promise and keep it, or select some simple goal and go for it. This may be sufficient structure for you at this time. Later, you may come to feel that you can take on another, little larger task or goal, and then go for that. Eventually, by making and keeping promises, your sense of honor will become greater than your moods or any baggage you may carry with you. Then you will find you can move out into entirely new arenas, including working toward these interdependent activities such as creating a family mission statement, holding weekly home evenings, and having special one-on-one bonding experiences. The key is to recognize where you are and to start where you are. You can't do calculus until you understand algebra. You can't run before you can walk. Some things of necessity come ahead of other things. Be patient with yourself. Even be patient with your own impatience. Now, you may be saying, but my situation is different. It's just too difficult, too challenging. There is no way I can do these things. If so, I encourage you to think about the experience of Admiral James B. Stockdale, as related in his book, A Vietnam Experience. A prisoner in Vietnam for several years, Admiral Stockdale tells of how American POWs, living in solitary confinement and completely isolated from one another for long periods, were able to develop a social will that was powerful enough to enable them to create their own culture with their own rules and norms and communication process. Without interacting verbally, they were able to establish communication with one another by tapping on walls and using wires. They were even able to teach this communication to new prisoners who were brought in and didn't know the code. Admiral Stockdale wrote, "The communist regime put each of us in solitary confinement in an attempt to sever our ties with one another and with our cultural heritage. This hits hard after a few months, particularly a few months of intermittent torture and extortion. In fits of depression, a man starts seeing the bottom of the barrel and realizes that, unless he gets some structure, some ritual, some poetry into his life, he is going to become an animal. In these conditions, clandestine encrypted tap and flash codes get improvised and start linking lives and dreams together. Then comes the need for common practice and united resistance, and in due course, if things are working right, codified law commences to emanate from the senior prisoner's cell. The communication network strengthens the bonds of comradeship, as over the months and years, a body politic of common customs, common loyalties, common values take shape." 26. Just think about it. They hardly even saw one another. Yet through the brilliant use of their 4 gifts, these prisoners built a civilization, a powerful culture of unbelievable social will. They created a sense of social responsibility and incredibly difficult times. There is so much truth to the expression, "Where there's a will, there's a way." Though less dramatic, consider how you could use family times and one-on-one times to create the same kind of powerful bonding and social will in the family. Catherine, daughter. My mother loved the arts, and she enjoyed planning trips to the ballet, the symphony, the opera, or any other play or performance in town. Tickets for these events were usually top priority and came well before money was spent on movies, junk food, or just plain goofing off. At times, I remember complaining that all this culture wasn't doing any good. But as I look back on those experiences, I realized how wrong I was. I'll never forget one experience I had with my mother that changed my life forever. We had a Shakespearean festival near our community, and one day my mother announced that she had bought us all tickets to see Macbeth. At the time, this meant nothing to me, because I was only 11 and completely unacquainted with Shakespeare. On the night of the play, we all piled into our car and headed toward the theater. I distinctly remember the snide remarks that were made that night about how we were all too tired to pay attention. We asked, couldn't we just go to a movie? But my mother only smiled as she patiently drove on, knowing secretly that the incredible talent of the bard would do her full justice. And it did. I can't ever remember a time when the emotions of the universe all seemed so vividly clear to me as they did that night. The dark secrets of Macbeth and his wife haunted me throughout the play as the innocence of my youth slipped away. Yet in its place, an understanding and an epiphany that only Shakespeare could have penned opened my heart and spoke to me. I immediately knew that my life would never be the same, for I had discovered something that touched me so deeply that I knew I could not reverse its effects even if I had wanted to. As we drove home from the theater that night, we were all silently bonded in a way I can never explain. My mother's love for the beautiful things of the world has been passed on to me and my children, and I can never thank her enough for this beautiful gift. Just think of the power of this bonding. this creation of the social will, this spirit of we in the family. How to further develop that spirit of we in the family will be our focus as we move into habits 4, 5, and 6. Habit 4. Think win-win. As we begin this chapter, I'd like to give you an overview of habits 4, 5, and 6. You may ask yourself, why are we getting into habits 5 and 6 when we're just beginning habit 4? It's because these three habits are highly interwoven, and together they create a process that will be immensely helpful to you in accomplishing all the things we've talked about so far. In fact, I often teach these habits first, because once you grasp the essence of this process, you have the key to working together effectively to solve any problem or accomplish any goal. To illustrate how helpful this process is, let me share with you a demonstration I often use in teaching these habits. I typically select a man from the audience who is young, tall, strong, and obviously fit. I invite him to the stage and then challenge him to an arm wrestling contest. As he's coming up, I tell him that I have never lost and don't intend to start now. I tell him he's going to lose and to get ready to lose. When he gets up to the stage, I stick my face right in his face and tell him the same things all over again. I get rather pushy, aggressive, and obnoxious. Obviously exaggerating a little, I let him know that in a few seconds he's going to be lying flat out on the ground. I look at his belt and tell him that I have a black one and that his brown one is an entire order of magnitude different. I tell him that even though he's twice my size, I will put him down. Almost inevitably, this type of confrontation stirs the man up and steels his resolve to best me. Then I ask the people in the front row if they will fund this operation, so that if I put him down, I get a dime, and if he puts me down, he gets a dime. They always agree. I ask another audience member to keep track throughout the contest, because each time one of us puts the other down, that person gets another dime. I ask them to time us for 30 seconds and tell us when to start. Then I grab the man's right hand, stand up right next to him, and give a grimacing, intimidating stare as we clasp hands and wait for the signal to go. By this time, the other person almost always is steeled to the task. The signal is given, and I immediately make my arm go limp. He puts me down. He usually tries to hold me there. Sometimes, feeling confused, he lets me up a little and then starts pushing to get me down again, which I quickly let him do. Then I struggle to get back up, and again the resistance starts. When we get to the top, he pushes me back down again. This usually goes on for a few seconds, and then I say to the person, "Look, why don't we both win?" Usually the other person gets the message and allows me to put him down once. But there is still tension and strain. Then I go limp and let him put me down again. It takes only a few more seconds before the two of us are working together, almost effortlessly, moving back and forth rapidly, putting each other's arms down. Then I look over to the front row and say, "Okay, how much do you owe us?" Everyone sees the point and begins to laugh. Can you see the tremendous difference in what is happening at the beginning and end of this demonstration? At first, the feeling is completely adversarial. It's win-lose. I win, you lose. There's no effort to understand, to cooperate. There's no seeking of a solution that's good for both of us. There's just a feeling of competition and the desire to win, to put the other down. Can you see how the tension of this win-lose approach translates into typical family squabbles, into arguments between marriage partners, between parents and children, between extended family members? But by the end of the demonstration, there's been a significant shift in thinking. It's no longer I win, you lose. It's, hey, we can both win, and win big. By understanding and cooperating creatively together, we can do something totally different that benefits us both far more than if either of us had won in the other sense. Can you sense something of the freedom, the creativity, the feeling of unity and shared accomplishment that comes when this is the typical approach to solving family problems? To some extent, we all have family interaction that resembles the beginning, but the more we can move toward the kind of creative and synergistic interaction where everyone wins, the more beautiful, the more effective our family culture will be. I often like to think of these three habits in terms of the root, the route, and the fruit. Habit 4, think win-win, is the root. It's the fundamental paradigm of seeking mutual benefit, or the golden rule. It's the underlying motive, the nurturing attitude out of which understanding and synergy grow. Habit 5, seek first to understand, put ellipsis, then to be understood, is the route. It's the method, the pathway that leads to rich interdependent interaction. It's the ability to step out of your own autobiography and really get into the head and heart of someone else. Habit 6, synergize, is the fruit. It's the result, the end product, the rich reward of the effort. It's creating transcendent third alternative solutions. It's not your way or my way, it's a better, a higher way. Together, these three habits create the process that leads to the most phenomenal magic in family life, the ability to work together to create new ideas, new solutions that are better than any individual family member could ever come up with alone. In addition, they build moral authority into the culture by integrating the principles of mutual respect, mutual understanding, and creative cooperation into the very structures, systems, and processes of the family. This goes way beyond the goodness of the people and the quality of their relationships. It causes perpetuation and internalization and institutionalization of these principles into the norms and mores and traditions of the culture itself.